Terms and conditions. If people knew how hard I had to work to gain my mastery, it wouldn't seem wonderful at all. Michelangelo. When you meet someone who speaks a foreign language well, you may attribute her skill in the language to natural ability. This is probably because you don't know about all the hard work that went into achieving this level of mastery. But with the exception of certain people we might call savants, anyone who has ever learned another language as an adult did so only as the result of real effort. In that way, this book is most assuredly not a quick fix. But if you apply the specific skills and abilities you have honed over a lifetime, learning a language can be fun and rewarding. The older you are, the more tools in your toolbox you can take advantage of to reach your goal. Everyone possesses unique sets of skills and abilities that can be applied to language learning, if they can get past some false beliefs. It is to these that we now turn. 3 myths about foreign language learning. From the very beginning of Richard's Korean language study, he felt frustrated with his progress. It seemed as if, no matter how hard he tried, he was not advancing fast enough. His teachers were constantly encouraging him to study harder and to memorize more. He knew that he was working hard, studying for class, meeting with native Korean speakers for language exchange, watching videos, and learning Korean songs. At first, he thought he had hit the age wall. Richard had been successful when he had studied German, Portuguese, French, and Japanese, but he began the study of Korean at age 52, and he thought that perhaps he was now too old to take on another language. Certainly, according to conventional wisdom, he should not expect much progress. One day, he was having coffee with his Korean language exchange partner, who has the inviting name Welcome. Richard wondered out loud whether Welcome felt his English had improved since coming to the United States. It certainly seemed to Richard that Welcome's English had gotten better, and Richard was expecting Welcome to tell him that he thought so too. Instead, Welcome said he didn't know. When Richard asked him what his teachers thought, Welcome replied that because American teachers always compliment students, he couldn't trust what they told him. Welcome went so far as to wish that his teachers would be more critical. For Welcome, the more they criticized, the more they showed that they were interested in his progress. This was an eye-opening conversation for Richard. From then on, he realized that his perceived lack of progress in Korean was a function of his own expectations about what it means to be a successful language learner. Richard had been measuring his progress by how much he didn't know. He saw the glass as half empty, and therefore pushed himself to memorize more and more material. But relying on rote memory alone is the second worst thing any adult foreign language learner can do. Of course, memorization is required to learn a foreign language. However, rote memorization exercises, such as listening to a text and then parroting it back verbatim, memorizing long passages of dialogue, slogging through flashcards, place the adult learner at a disadvantage cognitively. Because this ability declines with age, placing too much emphasis on rote memory can lead to frustration, is demoralizing, and can ultimately cause any adult language learner to quit. You may be wondering, if rote memorization is the second worst thing for an adult learner, what is the worst? It is the belief that one is too old to learn a foreign language. The next thing we want to do, therefore, is to dispel this and 2 other myths that surround language learning in adulthood. Myth 1. Adults cannot acquire a foreign language as easily as children. On the contrary, there is evidence to suggest that adults can learn new languages even more easily than children. There are only 2 areas where children may be superior to adults when it comes to language learning. The first appears to be their ability to acquire a native accent. It is certainly the case that normal adults are capable of achieving native-like fluency as well. But even if an adult language learner is more likely to speak with an accent, there is no reason to be overly pessimistic about it, as long as it does not interfere with intelligibility. Children's other advantage over adults is that they have no language learning anxiety. In other words, because children aren't burdened by a belief that they can't learn a language, they are free from such self-defeating thoughts. Myth 2. Adults should learn foreign languages the way children do. Children's brains and adult brains are different. Therefore, why would anyone expect that the same teaching techniques that work for children be appropriate for adults? They aren't. But unfortunately, adult language learners sometimes try to learn a language by stripping away all of the strategies and learning experiences that help them become successful adults in the first place. They try to learn a foreign language purely the way they acquired their first language. This isn't possible. Trying to do so inevitably leads to frustration and a higher probability of abandoning the goal. A more fruitful approach would be for adults to build on their considerable cognitive strengths and not envy or try to mimic children's language learning. Myth 3. When learning a foreign language, try not to use your first language. Some adult language learners believe that they should never ever translate from their first language to their target foreign language. But this advice deprives adult language learners of one of their most important accomplishments: fluency in their native language. Although it is true that one language is not merely a direct translation of another, many aspects of one language are directly transferable to a second language. It's not even possible to completely ignore these aspects, and trying to do so can be frustrating. For example, an English-speaking adult who is learning Portuguese could hardly avoid noticing that the Portuguese word to describe something that causes harm in a gradual way, insidioso, is suspiciously like the English word insidious. It would make no sense to pretend as if prior language skill in English is not transferable in this case. It is true that such cognates are not found between all languages and are sometimes inaccurate, as in wrongly equating the English word rider to the French word rider, which means to wrinkle. Nonetheless, looking for places where concepts, categories, or patterns are transferable is of great benefit, and also points out another area where adult foreign language learners have an advantage over children. Regrettably, any of these myths could prevent even the most highly motivated adult from embarking on a language learning journey. However, there is a great deal of research that addresses such false beliefs. Insights from the field known as cognitive science offer guidance that is directly relevant to the adult foreign language learner. What is cognitive science? Cognitive science is an interdisciplinary movement that began in the 1960s and became highly visible as a scientific enterprise during the 1970s. Cognitive science occupies the intersection of a number of fields in which researchers from many disciplines explore questions about the nature of mind. The disciplines centrally involved in this endeavor include psychology, linguistics, philosophy, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and anthropology. The field of education is now commonly included as well. As a scientific movement, cognitive science is notable because it represents a deliberate shift away from extreme specialization. Cognitive scientists actively promote inclusivity and the adoption of new points of view, and this cross-fertilization has produced hundreds of important new research programs. It is still the case, however, that cognitive scientists are generally trained in one of the specific disciplines. We chose the seven-armed starfish, Ludia ciliarius, to illustrate the field of cognitive science. Like the arms of a starfish, no one branch of cognitive science is more important than another. The arms must work in concert for the starfish to move. There is no head or tail, but all of the arms radiate from a central executive. For example, Richard and Roger were trained as psycholinguists in experimental psychology programs. However, they are also cognitive scientists because their graduate training emphasizes cognitive science, and their research and ideas are influenced by these related disciplines. Before discussing how cognitive science relates to adult foreign language learning in more depth, we first need to define some terms. Mind the gap. In describing mental processes, cognitive scientists frequently categorize them as being either top-down or bottom-up. Top-down processes, which are also referred to as conceptually driven processes, utilize what you already know in service of perception and comprehension.